Nobody in history has ever been tasked with a busier night than St. Nicholas on December 24th. There are currently about 2.4 billion kids under the age of 18 in the world. Can you imagine having to visit all of them and leave them something nice in one night? Even with magic, that's a lot to ask. The world's most jolly elf probably needs some caffeine in his system to help get him through it, right? Even if he is magical. So buy Sparkplug coffee, Santa. It's a Canadian product, thus Canadians don't pay for shipping, but Americans can get it too, and deliveries will arrive within a week. Sparkplug is the best you've ever brewed, plus it's convenient and affordable, certainly more than buying from a coffee shop every day. And these are premium quality beans, Nicky baby. Now be a member in the Autopilot Coffee Club to get perks and deals, but also pause or cancel that membership anytime. He mentions in the sequel he gets a 3-month vacation, so probably doesn't need coffee for 3 months, but then they can't deliver to the North Pole either. Hit up sparkplug.coffee/HYES and find your new favorite. Yeah, Santa can't be part of this, can he? Unless he goes back home to Chicago, Illinois.
Well, the North Pole is technically in Canada, isn't it?
Oh, maybe he can then.
There you go.
Right. That HYES promo code at the end there will save you 20% off your next order. Give old Sparkplug a try, Père Noël. Well, it's just one day until go time, when Santa is going to be live and in person in millions of homes. Let's talk about a 1994 comedy about the big man in red. Bev!
And action! Have you ever seen
The Santa Claus? Ho ho and so forth, movie monkeys, and thank you for making our podcast a part of your Christmas week. This is the 633rd episode of Have You Ever Seen? And we'll be spoiling the film, like we have with most of the ones we've ever reviewed. I'm your somewhat holly jolly host, Ryan Ellis, just somewhat holly jolly. And here's the lady who uses her snow globe to make me come home from work. My wife, Beth.
That's me.
I love how he's been gone, what does he say, 10 minutes?
Yeah.
And Charlie's using the globe already. Well, this wasn't planned, but December 2024 has turned into the month of movie stars. We've probably had plenty of months where every movie was headlined by a big star in the past, sure, but listen to the ones we've had in December 2024. Michael Douglas, Tom Hanks, Billy Crystal, Tom Cruise, Nicole Kidman, Tim Allen, plus we still have big names like Peter Sellers, Hugh Jackman, and Jake Gyllenhaal coming up next week. Okay then, Forced Labor was released by Disney 30 years ago on November 11th, 1994, so Remembrance Day here in Canada, and I guess that's Veterans Day or Flag Day or something like that. I think it's Veterans Day in America. It opened number 2 its first week and was quite a ways behind Star Trek Generations. The Santa Claus then was third in its second week, just third. As the calendar then turned to Thanksgiving and then early December for weeks 3 and 4, it ranked number 1, and by a healthy margin, which is the way things used to go. Movies would build, especially if it was a theme movie like this, with Christmas. Tim Allen was making his first big screen movie, but he was an instant star in a film that wound up grossing 6.5 times domestically what it cost to make. And then it went and pulled in another $45 million worldwide on top of that. So this was a blockbuster. But Beverly, this mega hit has been around for 3 decades. Not many people know this one any better than you. So how about filling us in on what this story is all about? Skinny us up.
Tim Allen is Scott Calvin, an ordinary guy and very so-so divorced dad who inadvertently gets Santa killed. Then, through a system that begs more than a few questions, he is then obligated to take Santa's place and must deliver presents to children all over the world this night and every Christmas Eve until such time as he slips on his own loose roof shingle and is replaced by whoever. Scott has a year to wrap up his civilian life, get fat, grow a beard, develop magical powers, and convince his ex that he hasn't lured their son into an elaborate shared psychotic delusion. All is well once Scott makes the full transition into Father Christmas, and he can just prove it's all real and finally solve the mystery of where all those presents have been coming from every year.
The way he's going to be out of the job, his son's going to have him killed.
I'm going into the family business. Kid, how do you think that's going to happen?
It's like the cub in Lion King.
Yeah.
Simba. Only way I could be king is if Dad dies. All right, in a nutshell, toy executive guilted by progeny into becoming world's most famous home invader. Because that's what Charlie's doing on Christmas Eve, right? Come on, go down the chimney. How can I? It's a pipe. But then I like actually about this movie, even though the effects are awful, the special effect of him going down things like, well, even chimneys, but that little pipe that no even mouse could probably fit down into, but it magically opens up and it creates, in some cases, fireplace hearths, great big ones in people's houses.
Big magical temporary fireplace for him.
But the effects were terrible in this movie.
Oh, God, they're so bad.
All right, well, the Rotten Tomatoes numbers are not that bad. 73% of critics liked the film, 43 fresh, 16 rotten. The average is only 5.9 out of 10. And 66% of audiences. The Santa Claus 2 is at 55%, so it just misses that fresh tomato status, while Santa Claus 3, The Escape Clause, is at just 17% from the critics.
That's a drop.
I think we'd probably agree with that 55%, right? Santa Claus 2, 2.5 stars out of 4. It was enjoyable enough, but where were the laughs?
Just wasn't funny. The plot could have worked. I was impressed by Tim Allen's commitment in this movie. I think I said to you at the time. Both of them, but his performance as the toy Santa, the duplicate that takes over like a fascist Santa, is so committed and could be funny if the writing was just a little better. Just funnier.
This was fourth at the 1994 U.S. box office. Forrest Gump was number 1, The Lion King was number 2, and Speed was number 8. We've covered all of those and many others from 1994. The sequels were big hits too, especially Part 3. They all had pretty small budgets, so it didn't cost much to make these blockbusters. And then they had the TV series. I think had, not have, the TV series. I believe that's off the air now. The Santa Clauses, which I don't know anything about. I know some of the people are in it, but I didn't look up what it's... Obviously, it's multiple Santa Clauses, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
This was up for a lot of awards and won some of them, but no Oscar nominations. And what a shame, visual effects wasn't one of the nominations.
Special effects often don't age well, but this is bleak.
They're barely better in Part 2, 8 years later.
Yeah, it's true. They don't repeat the worst offenders. You don't really see him going down the chimney in Part 2. You don't see that weird squeeze. They rely very heavily in Part 2 on the comet puppet, limited returns.
And those big, what do you call them, the Nutcracker guys? They're soldiers.
Those are kind of neat looking, actually.
They look like
they're just puppets, or they're just outfits probably that people are wearing.
Oh, could be a legitimate on-set things, people inside those, I guess. Okay, well, you didn't see this with your mother because she had to cancel your usual Christmas plans when you do watch this movie most years, I guess, every year?
Not every year, but...
Okay, but a lot of years. And you had to watch it with me instead. And we laughed. But tell people why this is one of your favorite Christmas movies and one you usually watch every year.
I love this movie. I don't think it's one of the greats, but in the tradition of all Christmas movies, my affection is a combination of enjoyment of a well-made, watchable, genuinely funny, and not too sentimental film. But mostly it's a lot of nostalgia for a movie that me and my mom really loved, and we made a tradition of watching every year. This movie came out the same year my parents got divorced. Until I graduated from college, Christmas Day was often just me and my mom killing time between scattered family events. Everything was spread apart and split apart for reasons, whatever. We just never had plans on Christmas Day, and her and I would hang out. And that's probably where the tradition of watching this movie started. This and Scrooge, those were our two movies that we watched every year. So the fact that this is also centered around a broken family maybe makes it resonate that much more with me. Or maybe I'm overthinking it. But at any rate, watching it this time, I hadn't seen it in a few years. And I haven't seen it without my mom in a while. But watching it with you, I was like, I should stop being embarrassed that I like this movie.
I think you should be.
I should be embarrassed?
You should stop being embarrassed. I agree. You should stop being embarrassed because I haven't seen this movie in its entirety, or anyway, really, in a very long time. And I laughed. And I was touched. It almost got to me towards the end. We said it when we did Galaxy Quest, I think it was last month, that when he's cast right, Tim Allen can be very sincere. And I don't agree with what you said in The Skinny, one key point about how he is a so-so dad, I guess, but he is trying. Unlike a lot of movies about this kind of character, he would be a far worse dad than he was. Yeah, he lies to Laura about why he's late, which is on Christmas Eve, because he's at work. It's a good reason to be late. But I don't think he's a deadbeat dad. He's not a deadbeat dad. And he does love his son.
Watching this movie now,
I thought he'd be more
30
of a
years
dick,
after it came out.
because Tim Allen, legitimately behind the scenes, real person, seems like he'd probably be a dick. But
and
this
he plays
and
a
Galaxy
dick well,
Quest,
yeah.
he does play that at different times.
A redeemable dick.
But I don't think he's ever that bad in this, and I expected him to be worse. That's what I'm getting at, I guess.
The 90s was a golden age for the redeemable dick. You can't really get away with this kind of character now the way you could then, especially because our standards for fathers are like sky high compared to what they were in the 90s. When you think of divorced dad in the 90s, it was, I see my kids every second weekend. I think I can start cooking Christmas dinner when it's already dark outside, and I'm surprised that it didn't work out. All the ways that he tries and fails.
That was a funny touch, though.
It is funny.
The number of dads that are at Denny's
so
with their
funny
kids.
At Denny's, it's all dads with their kids. And of course the idea is dads, they can't cook Christmas dinner. That kind of attitude stayed in the 90s, and that's fine. It belongs there. He's not a bad person. He doesn't know how to be a dad, and he's not trying very hard. And the movie gives us an example of a father figure who is trying. and doing like a much better job. And that's
Neil?
the stepdad, Neil. One of the things
He
that
dares to be a therapist, though.
Oh, yeah. Well, whatever. Scott is just so snarky. The 90s, the golden age of snarky comedy. Everybody loved a mean person. Somebody who was funny through being mean. But Neil, he's a great character. He's a great foil because he's not at all a villain. Neil and Laura, they're doing exactly what any sane parents would do under these circumstances. And talk about being well cast. Judge Reinhold, he just made a career out of being an affable punching bag, so he's perfectly cast here. At worst, he's stubbornly skeptical, but he's never, ever mean to Scott, even though Scott is super mean to him. And he takes the high road every time. And I always really love the scene at the end of the movie when Charlie is reunited with Laura and Neil. How long has he been gone? The movie's not clear.
Since Thanksgiving.
Like he's been missing for a month. And then he's reunited with Laura and Neil, and it's Neil that hugs him first. He gets right down on the ground with him. And the audience gets to see this real bond. He has this genuine relief on his face. He loves that kid. And I always have a real soft spot for grounded representation of blended families, especially in a movie for kids. I myself have a blended family. I love my stepmom so much. And I'd like to see a step-parent be accurately represented as a genuine member of your family. Not a villain, not a foil, not a punching bag. Well, he's a punching bag, but he's a good guy.
And when he does push back on Scott through a lot of the movie, Scott does deserve it. Especially because it would seem insane. Well, he's not saying it. Charlie is. But that eventually he's saying, I'm Santa Claus. Who would ever believe that? Until he gives you proof.
It's a nice touch in the sequel that at that point Laura and Neil have a daughter of their own.
But they're barely in it.
They're barely in it, but...
Did they ever talk to that kid?
They introduce the kid, and then they just seem to be MIA for the rest of the movie. You see them here and there. But I love that Scott has his own great relationship with that little girl. He's Uncle Scott.
She spends way more time with him than she spends with her parents.
I know, it's true.
We cut it out earlier. I think we're going to have to cut it out. Her name, the daughter, and we couldn't remember what it was. It's Lucy.
Lucy.
Liliana Mummy or Mumi?
Oh, because you pointed out there was Charlie and Lucy, like Charlie Brown. Right,
of course, yeah. She was in Cheaper by the Dozen. You may not agree with me that Scott is not a bad dad. He certainly seems to be trying more than a lot of movie dads have over the years, especially back then. But one thing I think that's indisputable is that Scott wants Charlie to believe in Santa. Neil doesn't. Neil wants the delusion to end. But Scott wants the kid to still believe, even though he himself does not believe. And yet he has to go through this whole process where... What was the movie I just covered recently where it's, what more do you need? What was it? Oh, The Polar Express. I did that on my own. What more does this kid need to believe that he's going to the North Pole to see Santa Claus and elves are real? In that world, all of it was real. Well, maybe that's a dream, but the way it's portrayed, everything the kid sees is real, but it's only at the end when Santa tells him, or the ticket, I guess, tells him believe, that he finally seems to be fully believing in everything he just saw. Well, you should have believed 15 minutes of the movie. Probably true here, too, with Scott, except he's more in denial than actually not believing. But it is a touch to the whole film that he wants his kid to always have faith in Santa Claus, Christmas, and the rest.
Part of the reason why Neil seems adamant on snapping Charlie out of this childish fantasy. It's not childish when you're a child. And he says that he stopped believing Santa when he was 3 years old. And then Laura's like, 3 years old? Like he was robbed of that magic as a kid.
So was she.
So she, yeah.
For the same reason, didn't get the toy they wanted. Which makes that Santa Claus, because of course there have been many Santa Clauses over the years, someone who really sucks.
Maybe the Santa prior to Scott was pretty terrible. Another line that they have in the sequel is that children's happiness is up 86% since you became Santa. I'm like, 86%? First of all, I have underestimated how important presents are in a child's happiness.
You should not have.
Yeah. Second of all, just how rotten was the Santa before this?
Well, okay, let's talk about that. So the red letter scene, the whole film, is early on when Charlie's woken up. He wakes up his dad because he hears a clatter on the roof. And there is Santa up on the roof, gets distracted by Scott, slips, slides off the roof, and then dies. Which the movie portrays as, okay, makes sense, he fell from that height. But he also does land in snow. It's not the tallest roof of all time.
He waves goodbye.
I think this is a whole fake out.
Okay,
why he picked Scott, I don't know.
This, yeah.
Scott Calvin, SC. He's naturally going to be Santa Claus, and look how good at it he is in the first and second movies, and I assume the third and the series and the rest. He was a natural. He just pushed back against it for so long, for about a year, basically. But the Santa Claus who starts out being Santa in this movie, I don't think he actually died. He does disappear. He does wave, like you said, Adam. I think that wave is basically saying, I needed to retire, and you're my way out. It's like the scene of Men in Black. I haven't been training a partner. I've been training a replacement.
Which implies that the only way to quit your job as Santa is to kill yourself.
I don't think he died.
Well, he disappears.
He goes to do something else. Maybe he goes back to what he used to do. Although, where would you go? In the second movie, we keep on mentioning the second movie, but Scott is maybe going to lose his ability to be Santa because he has to get married and he doesn't have anybody to marry. What does he do if that happens? Because he doesn't have a house anymore, doesn't have that job anymore at the toy company. Same with this guy, but he goes to a retirement place, I guess. He goes off to the Grey Havens with the elves from Lord of the Rings. Gandalf. Yeah. Gandalf, save us. Go off to the Grey Havens. Or is it just because they don't want to be grisly about how they killed Santa, that he falls in his back on snow? That maybe is what it is. Because you are killing Santa Claus in a comedy
so
early on.
The premise is a lot to ask kids to handle, so they make it a little cutesy. They do not invite you to think about it at all, which brings up my next point. It must be a little chilling for Scott once he processed the fact that neither Bernard or any of the other elves seem remotely concerned
the
about
guy they
what
knew so
happened
well.
to the last Santa. How did he die? What a tragedy. They treat it like little more than a minor hiccup in the operation. Your point, maybe the whole thing was planned. They seem pretty prepared
for the new
and
guy?
Mentally ready for him to show up. And then we learn that these elves are hundreds of years old, meaning they've probably seen Santas come and go dozens of times.
Yeah.
Santas are like hamsters to them. That's why they all have to change their name to Santa. It was getting too hard for the elves to remember them all. We all like to talk about how our employers don't care if we live or die. This is like an extreme example of it.
The employees don't care.
Yeah, they could care less. They just carry on with
Although, with this clause stuff in this movie, the second movie, and I guess the third one has a different clause. I don't know what it is. I don't care.
The escape clause.
Okay, there you go. Yes, it's in the title. It's the name. It's the titular role. Whatever. But who makes these rules? And who enforces these rules?
Magic, Ryan, magic.
Well, David Krumholtz was only 16 when he made this movie as Bernard. This is probably more true of the sequel, but I guess in both examples, he is really over the top. I'm sure it wasn't his choice. It must have been John Pasquin, the director, saying to him, be bigger. And in the sequel, even more so, Michael Lembeck saying, David, when you go across the room or when you do that gesture, that face, more and more, please.
It is a kid's movie. He's playing a Christmas elf.
A Jewish person playing an elf as well. All about Christmas.
You're not like, oh, he's Jewish? No way. I had this massive soft spot for David Krumholtz. He's one of those character actors. I mean, he's been working since he was a kid, and I just love him every time I see him in something.
Usually he's a funny guy. Well, we've covered him in Harold and Kumar. He's one of the two guys that have their own odyssey. They're looking for the perfect hot dog. Or just a hot dog, I guess. And he's an Oppenheimer, which we covered back in the summer this year, the Best Picture winner.
He's best in comedy.
Yeah, definitely. Not so much in this movie. He's in the sequels. We'll go through the cast. Almost everybody is in, if not all the sequels, at least the next sequel. But he's the one that tells him about the clause that when he put on the suit that activated the Santa Claus, that very small print on a card that Scott did see. And he has to come back the next Thanksgiving. But he does go back to his normal life, eating sweets. That was fairly funny. His boss is Peter Boyle, incidentally. And then Peter Boyle, I know it from watching 2, is Father Time. Never acknowledged that he was in the first movie as his boss. And I guess he's in the third one as well.
I never put that together. We watch these movies like less than a week apart.
And he played a very famous TV father. And Tim Allen was a famous TV actor at this point. Boyle was in Everybody Loves Raymond.
Tim Allen was also a famous TV father.
Oh, true. Yeah, he's a father, too. I'm thinking of, the older generation father, not the main character father in Raymond. Allen, of course, was the main star. He, by the way, was in this movie that was a big hit and #1 a couple of different weeks. Also, the #1 TV show was Home Improvement. And I think he had the #1 book as well, all at the same time.
Wow.
And this was his very first movie.
The 90s were so good to Tim Allen.
And he was coming off of being, I think it was the 80s, when he got arrested as a drug dealer. And it was unusual for Disney to hire any kind of ex-con in any role. I think even if he just worked for Disney as a janitor or something, they maybe wouldn't hire you then. And here they have him as a lead actor in a Christmas movie in a pretty big prestige release. And they wanted Bill Murray, though. You mentioned Scrooged. There's a movie where a guy has an arc of being a jerk and end up being a... I still think Bill Murray's playing it as if, I'm not redeemed. I'm trying so hard to prove I'm redeemed. But we said because he's trying to shut up Richard Donner, that's why he played it that way. But they wanted him for this movie, but he didn't want to do a Christmas movie again. And
Chevy Chase was also
Chevy Chase. And Murray was coming off of doing Groundhog Day, where he had a similar kind of arc anyway. So maybe it was the right thing that they got Tim Allen instead.
I would have loved to see Bill Murray in this role. I think Chevy Chase also would have killed it.
But you think Tim Allen was good, though, right?
No, I love Tim Allen in this movie. I'm not saying, I want to recast, but Bill Murray, though.
In most roles, he'd be as interesting as the
he
guy
would
who
have
got
been
it.
really well cast in this. I understand where he would be like, I already made my Christmas movie. And
You know what he wouldn't have been better than in a Christmas movie? And he was one of the choices, and Nicholson was another one. And we covered it years ago, and we said it then. He would not have been better than Billy Bob Thornton in Bad Santa. Neither would Nicholson. They are great actors.
Nobody could have done it like Billy Bob Thornton.
Partly the swearing. Not that Bill Murray's never sworn in a movie before, but Billy Bob commits to that part, the real vile part of him that I don't know that even Bill Murray or Nicholson could pull off.
There's a darkness. He takes that role to a place that I could never see Bill Murray pulling off.
Alan probably could too, but they didn't ask him to do that in this or Galaxy Quest. It never gets that dark in these two big roles he had in the 90s. He had other ones, of course, too. Toy Story, I didn't say that. He's the voice of Buzz Lightyear. The year after this, in fact. Man, he was on such a roll there. One of the key characters, too, is Judy, the elf, played by Paige Tamata, who's not in the sequels, I guess, because she grew up. What are you going to do?
Oh, sure, yeah. They cast a kid who looks plenty like her.
I thought maybe it was, and I realized, well, it can't be. It's been 8 years, but she looks so much like her, the other actress in the
Bernard,
sequel.
David Krumholtz actually looks the same 8 years later. He still looks 16 at that point.
I guess so, yeah.
Every other elf has to be recast.
And they're kids playing these elves, obviously. You noticed it, and of course it's online when I read the trivia after we watched, that there are a lot of elves. You mentioned one especially, we see her a few different times, but there are a ton of elves that are basically stalking Scott around town back in Lakeside, Illinois, the way that the guy stalks Cruz in Eyes Wide Shut. Why are they doing this? People point out online that...
You're comparing those movies. Just like Eyes Wide Shut.
Well, we watched that last week. We covered it last week. But why are they doing this? And it's before he's even got the suit. I think there's an elf at the Christmas party when he and Susan are being honored.
Oh, really?
That's what I read, or something like that. Before he's ever touched the suit.
That goes with your theory, then, that they picked him to be the next Santa. They just were like, I'm just worried about Charlie, and I really know that becoming Santa is going to make Scott a better dad.
Why do you think that they are in the movie, though, when he is supposed to be Santa Claus?
It's an Easter egg. I think it's just a little touch of magic. As the movie goes on, he's becoming Santa more and more. They don't draw a lot of attention to it. It's a fun thing that they put in there for people to discover. Christmas movies, when they are a hit, they do get watched over and over and over more than any other kind of movie.
And you probably noticed that because you've seen the movie so often, right?
Yeah, I recognize the kids. There's one particular kid, actually, the twin girls that just have, like, memorable faces, and then I kept seeing them everywhere after that. And if you look closely, they have their ears on, so it's not just an Easter egg. Clearly, it's intentional that they're supposed to be elves just hanging out.
Mingling in society.
Being in proximity to Scott, to keep an eye on him, make sure he remembers... This is your life now. You can't get away from this.
How can he not remember when he gets fatter, grayer, and even jollier as the year goes on until the next Christmas?
Keeps growing back.
Shaves it, comes right back in. That's a special effect that does not look good at all.
Sure doesn't.
It's a nice touch and it's fairly funny, but it's not well done.
He plays it well and it's funny. And you say jolly. It's true. He goes from being this selfish and certainly acerbic guy who's charming enough, but his charm comes from this rather mean wit. But as the movie goes along, he just becomes more sweet
if this wasn't
and
Disney...
approachable. And kids love him, and he starts to love kids back. He can barely pay attention to his own son at the beginning of the movie. By the end, kids are approaching him, and he just has something sweet to say to every one of them. He seems to love their attention.
Look at the way he's in the sequel with all the elves. He's so supportive of them. That's great. Way to make that thing better. I like that toy. He's so supportive. Homer.
That's why he's such a great Santa.
And I do think he's a better dad than you think he is. Maybe because I didn't have a very good dad at all, and I would have killed to have even this guy.
He was like a good 90s dad. That's the thing, is standards for dads were low back then. The idea that you could get divorced and just see your kid once in a while instead of really taking part in raising them.
So let's talk about the magic again, because the snow globe is when people believe. We see it with Elizabeth Mitchell in the sequel, and it works on Scott in this. That's, I think, what really finally convinces him, right? He finally believes. And Bernard shows up at Laura's on Thanksgiving. It takes him and Charlie away. Both he and Scott should know better than taking the kid away. And as we said, the stepfather and the mother are not that worked up. They're worked up, but not nearly as much as they should be, considering A, he's gone, and Scott's not supposed to see him unsupervised as it is. Where's the orange alert, which I don't think they had back in 1994. Maybe they did, but there should be an orange alert for a solid month, too. Yeah. These people should have no hair from pulling it all out.
And they think Scott's crazy. They are convinced that he has succumbed to this complete delusion, which they should think, because it is crazy.
Well, if we're not going to believe in the magic, obviously, yes.
No, at the end, of course, the magic is proven to them, and they are forced to...
And when Judge Reinhold says, Santa? That's one of the best things he's ever done in a movie.
I know, he's like
he sells that it's a 35-year-old or 40-year-old man.
In him.
That he's 3 years old all over again. Wendy Kirsten's pretty solid in this, and she looks even better, actually, in the second one somehow, 8 years later. But Reinhold, who's not great in the whole thing, but that one moment is one of the best moments in the whole movie. I think that's why towards the end I was almost getting a little teary. I loved the way that Alan was playing the scenes with Eric Lloyd, his son, and then that thing with Reinhold. He and Scott have clashed the whole movie. Now suddenly he believes in Scott, in this fantasy, this ridiculousness. And this is also a movie like you saw last year for the first time. I saw it when it first came out on Netflix, The Christmas Chronicles, where Kurt Russell ends up in jail and then throws a concert, and that's a fun sequence. But Tim Allen as Santa in this movie also ends up in jail, and the elves, ELFS, have to break him out.
Boy, the elves are annoying. I hate it so much.
Bad actors.
Yeah. Every time this movie veers into, hey, aren't elves cool? What do they say? We're your worst nightmare. We're elves with attitude.
Yeah, right.
I cringe myself inside out. It's painful to watch.
It's a bad line anyway, but it's also badly delivered.
Yeah, and every time they try to get into, we're elves, we're inventing all these cool technologies to make Santa's life easier, I'm like, please stop. This is so unnecessary. There's no value add to any of this. It's not funny. It's not cute. Maybe kids like it, and maybe that's something where I just need to lighten up and say, hey, kids think this stuff is cool. Relax. Just let them enjoy what they like.
The second one panders to kids more than this one does, I think, though.
I think you're right. It's definitely, like you talked about,
Fart
David
humor.
Krumholtz's over-the-top reactions.
Boop, 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 boop,
Yeah.
boop,
Oh, yeah. Even
That
the
type of
sound
music.
effects. Yes. Turns his head and there's a whip sound effect. It's a little bit cartoonish. They were definitely going for the kid audience more. It's fine. It's a Christmas movie, as they should. But sometimes I can enjoy it and I can put myself in that headspace. And sometimes it is just embarrassing to look at. And the elves were way up there.
Were you touched like I was about the ending?
Love the ending. They're being reunited. Neil and Scott find a place together. And Laura, too. And you're right, when Judge Reinhold blows that whistle, and it's played for laughs, but it's also lovely. But for me, the big emotional moment is Charlie being reunited with Neil. And even though it's not really played to be the big main moment, but there's just something about that. And I know this from my own experiences with a blended family. But the older I get, the more that is what moves me, that everybody can just become this one big messy family.
But also the growth in Scott in many ways, or Santa now. He's grown in so many ways over the past year. But one of the big ones is to say to Charlie on Christmas Eve, which in the past has been his night, and then Charlie goes to Laura's the next day, and probably for several days after that, Christmas and beyond. But it's to say, you need to stay here with your mother and Neil and be with them tonight. Because A, I'm busy, and B, it's not the most safe thing in the world. We did it last year, and it wasn't exactly safe for either of us. But it's also because I can share you with them. But then they get their cake and eat it too in this movie because he gets to go on the sleigh after all, and Mom's fine with it.
I don't know why they don't just let Charlie go with him every year. He's magic. Nothing
Because
bad is going
Scott
to happen
has
to
to
him.
grow.
Yeah, good point. Because Scott has to grow.
And his growth is to finally let it be okay. Because obviously Charlie's usually with Laura and Neil anyway, but it's okay he's with them on this night. So as far as the cast goes, Tim Allen was in the sequels, obviously, when he's the main character, and that series, The Santa Clauses. We covered Toy Story years ago and Galaxy Quest just a few weeks ago. And then he's been on TV a lot, especially more recently, but Home Improvement in the 90s, such a huge show. I watched that. I enjoyed it well enough. Thought it was fairly funny. And he was also in, was it Last Man Standing?
Yeah.
And, of course, Santa Clauses, and I think something else as well.
He's had a great TV career for sure.
Judge Reinhold was in the Santa Claus sequels as Neil, of course. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Beverly Hills Cop, and Gremlins. We covered those. Another Christmas movie, by the way, Gremlins. So this is the fourth time he's come up on this podcast. Wendy Kirsten's been in 3 movies in total now. The Santa Claus sequels, we didn't cover those, but we did cover Air Force One and Away From Her, the Canadian movie by Sarah Polley.
Right. She's one of those actors that whenever I see her in a movie, I go, oh, they must have shot this in Canada.
They did. They shot
Yeah,
this in
they
and
did. They
around.
shot it quite nearby to where we live, yeah.
The interiors may have been in L.A. and
I think Oakville, Ontario, which is basically a suburb of Toronto, stood in for the town in Illinois where they are.
Okay, right. But also they were in Toronto for some of the scenes. Eric Lloyd plays Charlie. Walt Lloyd, the cinematographer, is not his dad or his uncle or something. I thought he was, but it doesn't seem like they're actually related. Just coincidence. He's in the sequels, and he's also in the series, and I think only one episode. Of course, by then he's an old man. If you're going to cast
An
him...
old man. Okay,
Whatever.
he's middle-aged. Relax.
Well, I'm an old man, too.
He's younger than us, so let's calm down.
Well, I'm old, so... Carmoltz we talked about already. Paige Tamata was not in the sequels, but she did have a cameo in the Santa Clauses, that series. And I think she's pretty good for an 8-year-old in that role.
Yeah.
Larry Brandenburg, who plays the cop assigned to find out what happened to Charlie. Where's this kid? And we're arresting Scott Calvin. He was in the Shawshank Redemption that year, one of the inmates, and he was also in Fargo. He's Stan Grossman. You're saying, what are you saying? And then Peter Boyle was in the sequels as Father Time in those, but as Tim Allen's boss in this. We covered him so far in 4 other movies: The Candidate, Young Frankenstein, which I just did back in October. Putting on the Ritz. Gary Cooper, super duper. Also Taxi Driver and Malcolm X. The director, we barely mentioned his name, but John Pasquin, who worked on TV as a director for 14 years. And he was effectively, and I guess still is, Tim Allen's caddy, because he directed him in Jungle to Jungle later in this decade, the 90s. Joe Somebody, that was 2002, I think, because I got wondering why he didn't do Santa Claus 2, and I didn't read anything about it yet. I haven't looked at the trivia for the second one. But he was working with him in 2002, and he's worked with him since on other TV shows. So if they had a falling out, and that's why he didn't do Santa Claus 2, it didn't continue, because they worked on other things since. He did direct Home Improvement and Last Man Standing, for example.
So they're collaborators, they're a team.
Usually, but I'm just wondering why he didn't do the first sequel, because he made a very big hit. Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick wrote this. They are writing partners. I love his name, by the way, Leo Benvenuti. This was his debut. He also wrote Space Jam, which I don't like very much, but Chris and I covered that on Scoring at the Movies. And the producers, Robert Newmeyer, Brian Riley, and Jeffrey Silver. There were executive producers as well, too, of course. But Newmeyer worked on the sequels, also Sex, Lies, and Videotape, which we covered earlier this year. And Walt Lloyd, I'll mention in a second, shot that. Maybe he hired Walt Lloyd, I don't know. Newmeyer also worked on Mr. Baseball and Ready to Rumble, 2 podcasts on Scoring at the Movies. Brian Riley worked on Santa Claus 2, and Jeffrey Silver worked on both the sequels, but also Edge of Tomorrow, which we covered only a few months ago, and Mr. Baseball, the Tom Selleck movie. The film is 185-1. We saw it on Disney+. It looked all right, I guess. Nothing wrong with it. Walt Lloyd shot it. He also shot Sex, Lies, and Videotape and Shortcuts. So that was for Altman. Sex, Lies is a Soderbergh movie and a lot of other comedies. And he's not related to Eric Lloyd, the Charlie Calvin actor. The editor, Larry Bach, cut The Mighty Ducks and Bring It On, 2 podcasts you will find on Scoring at the Movies. So he's a sports movie guy, I guess, more so. And Michael Convertino was the composer. He did compositions, or wrote music, I guess, for Bull Durham, another sports movie. But you and I covered that one because Chris didn't have a podcast with me at that point. One of my favorite movies, certainly one of my favorite sports movies of all time, Bull Durham. And he did the music for Pasquin's Jungle to Jungle as well, later in the 90s. So the look, the editing, the music, they're all solid at least. They're fine, right?
Not to say it's not a cinematic movie. It definitely is, but...
A TV director.
A TV star, a TV director, but I think it doesn't feel like a TV movie at all. But it does take that TV sensibility about telling an economical story. I said this about War of the Roses. I think there's something about working on TV for many years that makes people very good storytellers.
Staying focused.
Staying focused. Just putting as many jokes as you can in there, too. That these are things that you have to learn how to do when you're making a sitcom. When you carry that over to a movie, it translates to this really watchable movie, which is an underrated quality.
The pitch meeting, so the guy who does pitch meeting, Ryan George, just this week, so it'll be weeks ago when we post this, but was Love Actually, which you don't like. But part of the joke in that is that the writer has created so many different characters, and the movie is too long and has too much stuff going on in it, but they're all tied together. Well, barely. But in a movie like War of the Roses, which is 2 hours long, and in this, which is barely an hour and a half, a little more than an hour and a half, they do stay focused, and they don't have too many plots and other things going on. People are going to watch Love Actually the next few days if they haven't already, and they'll watch this. This, to us, you and I, is far better, and part of the reason why is it mostly stays focused.
Yeah. You talked about Christmas Chronicles, which owes a debt to this movie. It's like a cheeky, funny movie about Santa Claus, and has lots of similar beats in the plot, and it gets so busy. There's just so much going on.
Yeah, that's true.
They almost fall into that trap in Santa Claus 2, but actually, no, they keep it together, and they keep pretty focused on just the 2 parallel stories going on. But it's just a trap that so many filmmakers fall into. You want people to want to watch your movie every single year? Make it under an hour and 45 minutes and get rid of all of those messy B-plots and all of those extra characters.
Yeah, people love Love Actually. They watched it undoubtedly the last few days.
Well, those people are wrong.
So, because we're never going to cover it because you hate it, do your impression of that kid for everybody right now.
I'm not sad because me mum died. I'm sad because I'm in love. Psycho kid.
I love that when I actually saw that scene. Is not what he says, but your version's better.
I saw that movie once, like 20 years ago, but in my mind, it has been elevated to this Cockney, ridiculous psychopath kid being like, I'm not even sad because me mum died.
Oh, you're not way off. You're not way off. It's just not what he actually says. All right, what happens next in the Santa Claus? Well, the sequels and the series, obviously. But as far as an insouciant version of what happens next, I guess Charlie has to face the fallout of missing a month of school because he went with his father to the North Pole on Thanksgiving and he was gone till Christmas. And I think Santa faked his death And that's been covered up, although it's probably happened many times before, though, too.
And maybe part of the plot of Santa Claus 2 should have been that if he stopped being Santa Claus, and he would immediately go to prison for kidnapping. He's been at large this whole time. Claus
True.
have probably been looking for him.
He's got to stay one step ahead of them with his reindeer. Comet, especially. Speaking of insouciance, especially in the sequel. Not good effects and pretty bad voice work on Comet, but it was fun at least.
Frank Welker does the voice, I think.
Right, yeah. All right, then. December 23rd, we're 2 days away from the big day and 1 day away from Scott Calvin being, Santa Claus, I should say, being front row center. Your last thoughts on one of your favorite Christmas movies, The Santa Claus.
I'm not about to make the case for this being one of the greats, but I'm happy that you back me up in not feeling bad about my affinity for it. It really is funny, and it has just the right level of sentimentality.
And some sauce early on. I like it. We laughed a lot. I found it pretty touching, and maybe we'll watch it again next year.
We do a trivia thing with a lot of our friends, and part of the reason I feel embarrassed for liking this movie is because once there was a question, what is the real name of Santa Claus in the movie The Santa Claus? And I answered it, I think, before you even finished asking the question.
That was this year.
And all of our friends stopped what they were doing, looked at me like I was an alien. And they're like, how do you know that? I'm like, what? It's a good movie. And that's when I learned, actually, it's not. But it is.
But it was preordained because his initials are SC. So that was how we saw The Santa Claus. Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to everyone. And to everyone, a good day, a good night, whatever. Whatever you do, don't drink and drive. We hope the holidays are fun and relaxing for you, whatever you're going to end up doing. Now, as for us, even though the year is almost over and a lot of people who make podcasts will be off until the new year and have been off already for probably weeks, Have You Ever Seen still has 2 more episodes before the calendar turns to 2025. If you look under the tree, we might even surprise you with 1 more. But yes, I'll be back on Friday the 27th doing a monologue about Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners, counter-programming to the light comedy we had today and to the light comedy, not so much light, but a comedy we'll have next Monday. And that show next Monday will be Bev and me yapping about our first Peter Sellers comedy in a very long time, Being There, the last episode on this podcast in 2024. The coming attractions opinion question for Being There. Hal Ashby, the director, had an incredible decade in the 70s. He made 7 movies. The 7 flicks were nominated for 24 Oscars and won 7 of them. And while he kept working with stars in the leading roles, he kept casting different people to be the main character in his movies. So look through those 7 motion pictures he directed in the 70s and pick who you think was the best of the leading men or women. You've got names like Nicholson, Beatty, David Carradine, Fonda, Jane Fonda, Voight, and Sellers. Who's the best one? Who's your favorite one of all those people?
All right, so for our answers to that question, check out our next podcast about Being There. You already know how to find us, but let me remind you to favorite or subscribe wherever you listen, which is also where you can find our archive. We've made hundreds of episodes, and they're all available for free. While you're there, though, if you could leave us a rating and a review, that is a great way to support us. We really appreciate that. We are both on Twitter. I'm at Bev Ellis Ellis, and Ryan is at MovieFiend51. We're also now both on Blue Sky. I am Bev Ellis Ellis on Blue Sky. And Ryan, what's your Blue Sky handle?
Ryan-Ellis.
Ryan-Ellis, Blue Sky. You can also reach us by email. HaveYouEverSeenPodcast@gmail.com. And you can find our podcast on YouTube. Our channel is at HYES Ellis. And to enjoy freshly roasted premium coffee delivered straight to you in Canada or the US, please go to sparkplug.coffee/HYES, where you will enjoy a 20% discount.
Ho, ho, ho. Can I do the Tim Allen Home Improvement? Ho, ho, ho. No, I guess I can't. He does both of those things in this movie.
Yep.
He does the noise and also the that he often did on the show.
He knows what he's there for. And